Have you ever wondered how technology is transforming the way we care for older adults? I'm Keren Etkin, and my guest today on the AgeTech Podcast is Michael Skaff, CIO of Sequoia Living, who's been at the forefront of groundbreaking innovations for 3 decades, starting with building AI chatbots before they were everywhere. We talked about the surprising role technology plays in solving today's toughest challenges in senior living. So whether you're an AgeTech entrepreneur, an elder care professional, or someone considering senior living for yourself or a loved one, stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one. Michael, welcome to the show.
Keren, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's a privilege to be on here with you today.
Likewise. So you and I go way back. So I know you're... at least your recent career history from the time that we've known each other. But Could you maybe tell a little bit of your backstory to our audience? Because I think it is incredibly, incredibly interesting.
I think both the professional backstory and maybe a touch on the personal backstory too, because it's relevant, at least to me. So on the professional side, I've been in tech for about 30 years, starting out in a number of software companies back in the 90s. And I started in a couple of industries, probably a little too early. So an example of that is I worked for one of the very first AI chatbot companies 24 years ago, a company called Neuromedia and then called Native Minds. We built what they called a VREP at the time, a virtual customer service representative in an AI chatbot that we thought would be a great idea to answer customers' questions about toothpicks and toothpaste and all other manner of other things. Again, probably about 15 years too early back then. Nobody really knew what a chatbot was or why they'd want one, unfortunately. So now, just about everybody has a chatbot, and we're seeing the explosion of AI and LLMs and all these other exciting opportunities. But that was a little early. Another sort of early mark there in the technology industry was digital signage. Worked for an early digital signage company called AdSpace Networks, later CoolSign Media. We built out amazing display technology, both hardware and software, that companies like Nike and Dick's Sporting Goods and others would use. So in the stores, they'd have digital signs. And now everybody sees digital signage everywhere, so I don't have to explain the concept. But back then, this was in the days of the $10,000 to $20,000 plasma screen TV. It was really in the early days of digital signage when it was just emerging out, at least in the US, emerging out of Las Vegas, which is sort of where it was born in the US, to other industries and other customers that saw the potential of large-scale digital signage and digital video content controlled centrally. So I've seen a few industries early on, and I like to try to learn lessons from those challenges or maybe those failures in healthcare over the last decade in senior living. So we're still, I believe, in the early days of really seeing the maximum efficacy of AgeTech and other technologies in aging and senior living. But 30 years in tech, most of it in IT, the last 10 years, Chief Information Officer, Chief Operating Officer of a couple of senior living operators in and around California, and really a privilege to do what I do every day, which is to serve older adults, really try to find the best ways to deliver care and services, focusing on the care and services, not focusing on the technology. And I want to make that key point because it's not in the what and the how we do what we do, it's in the why we do what we do that matters to me. And that always has and always will. So really appreciate working for Sequoia Living now and really excited about our mission to deliver housing and services out to older adults around California and finding new ways to do that, potentially via technology sometimes. So on the personal side, my mother got her PhD in gerontology back in the day. And my father actually surprised my mother by falling out of a tree 40 something years ago and breaking his back and has lived his life, most of his life, in a wheelchair since then. Which didn't really slow him down. If anything, it's really motivated him to get out there and do work for people with disabilities and older adults as well, and look at different ways of making the world accessible. So I got the chance to travel to Japan with him probably 30 years ago now when he was meeting with governments over there to try and make Japan more accessible. He started the Mayor's Office on Accessibility in San Francisco to make San Francisco more accessible. He continues to do work even after his retirement in working with the state architect in California and lots of different ways of making communities more accessible. So it comes to me both personally and professionally, and I feel like I've ended up, people talk about ikigai as sort of the centralized point between what you want to do, what the world needs, and what you're good at. And this seems to be the sweet spot for me, where I both care about what I'm doing and I have some personal background in this as well.
Wow, your father sounds like a huge inspiration. And you can tell him that, at least
Both parents,
from my
both parents,
observation, when I visited Tokyo, that was the most accessible place I've ever been to. Way
It
more
wasn't 30
accessible than
years
San
ago.
Francisco.
Both are making progress. 30 years ago, I had the experience of trying to get them onto trains, for example, in Tokyo and all up and down Japan. We traveled the full length of Japan, visiting the prefectures along the way, and had incredible experiences there, but most of it was very inaccessible at the time. And they've made significant progress. So it's nice to see the world finally focusing on accessibility, both from a governmental standpoint as well as sort of a local area standpoint, and businesses are starting to take this up more now too. Instead of trying to resist accessibility, they're trying to enable accessibility so that they can serve the broadest audience as well.
So currently you're in the CIOs, you're wearing the
Yes.
CIO's hat, but you have worked for multiple senior livings in the past. And how would you say that the CIO role has been transformed over time? And is it different for different organizations?
That's a really good question. I actually had this same conversation around the same topic with a group of CIOs not in senior living, because you're starting to see a shift, not just in senior living around the CIO role, but in general. You're starting to see CIOs move into chief operating officer roles. You're starting to see CIOs move into chief executive officer roles in some cases as well. The CIO of a large food company that's well known in the US called Whole Foods, that was then bought by Amazon. But their CIO became their CEO because IT these days, technology is really distributed across the organization and is really sort of the lifeblood of a lot of the operations now that everybody relies on data to do their work. So as an IT person, we see more of the operations and more of what's working, what's not working so well, and some of the opportunities to bring different departments together to do, to envision new services or optimize services. So it's a privilege to get to do things like this, to see those opportunities come together and to be able to leverage that for the benefit of an organization, especially when I'm working in nonprofit now. But see, the CIO role has changed from really sort of a utility provider to now being a strategic asset in organizations. And senior living is just starting to wake up to this as an opportunity now that we're starting to leverage technology more in this industry. And you're starting to see more CIOs in senior living operators, which you didn't for a long time. So these operators, both on the healthcare and residential services side, are saying, hey, it's not just Wi-Fi we need in our buildings, but if we can do amazing things with shift management on the operational side, or resident engagement platforms on the resident services side, open up new revenue opportunities. So there are myriad opportunities that senior living operators are taking advantage of with a CIO role and with, broadly speaking, in more strategic investment in technology and services that really are less about the technology and more about what it enables from an operations standpoint and from a resident and staff experience standpoint. You'll hear me talk about that a lot, the staff experience and the resident experience, because again, it's not about technology. We're not a tech company. We're not doing this for tech's sake. We're doing it for the sake of our residents that we serve and the community members when we serve the outward community, as well as for our staff, because we want to make sure that they have a wonderful experience working for us as well. And that turns around and makes a staff stay for or want to stay for 10, 20, 30, 40 years in some cases.
Which is one of the most important metrics that anyone in this industry should be tracking: retention, staff retention.
Yes, we all know it's still a challenge. Labor is still a challenge, as you've mentioned before too. But I think there's some opportunities now that operators looking, in addition to diversifying the services that they're providing to the residents, really looking at how you attract and retain the best staff.
So speaking of retention and the labor shortage,
yes.
What role do you see technology currently playing in tackling the staffing crisis in senior living? And how would you envision it evolving in the future? Like, what are still the existing gaps?
To some degree, the answer I give you will depend on the context. So in the US, we are focused on technology, I would say, and this is a generalization, of course, there's some organizations that are doing more or less of this, but on optimization and delivery of labor and optimization of that labor. So shift management, as I mentioned, some ways of bringing in effectively, efficiently, cost effectively as well, outside labor where and when it's necessary. It's looking at optimizing how we're delivering services to our residents, automating things. You're starting to see robotics show up, whether it's Bear or other companies that are bringing robotics into senior living in interesting and new ways to sort of lift the burden of the day-to-day maintenance of those facilities or communities. Outside the US, you're starting to see more robotics and other automation directly on the caregiving side. I will say you're also seeing, having just come from a year in a technology provider as well, you are seeing more investment both in the US and around the world, in technology for safety and enhancement of some of the services for senior living, in again, both in the residential services side as well as in the healthcare side. So all of these things, theoretically at least, should be helping to relieve the burden on the staff and really let them focus on the face-to-face time, the caregiving time, the hands-on time that they're with the residents and the people that we're caring for. In some cases, that's not always living up to the dream or the focus. I'm still seeing EHR companies, especially in our industry, on their model to try and lighten the burden that we all know EHRs can be sometimes. Rather than just being a billing and documentation tool, there are some opportunities being taken by some companies to turn the data around and look at ways to optimize staffing. And so they trying to send staff to where they're needed the most, for example. So when you have residents with higher acuity or higher fall risk, for example, really trying to optimize the care to those. It's still, I would say, in its early stages, but I'm really excited to see where that will go because hopefully, again, that lets the staff do what they do best, but helps technology sort of wrap around them as a service and enables them to focus on the caregiving experience primarily and foremost.
Which is,
does that answer your question?
At the end of the day, what we want. Absolutely.
That's what we care about. That's why we're here. It's not for the technology. It's not for anything else. It's really to make sure that we're delivering excellent care and services and housing to the people we care for.
Absolutely. And what would you say, how would you describe like the ideal technology procurement process for senior living? If you were now standing in front of an audience of 100 aspiring CIOs, what would you tell them to do? How would you tell them to go about finding what the challenges are and looking for tech solutions?
That's a really good question. And I just did something similar to that not that long ago. Speaking engagement I had recently, but hasn't actually changed that much in the last 10 or 15 years, other than just maybe some opportunities around the edges. You still have to spend time with the group that you're trying to serve, whether it's the residents as the end sort of users or customers, or the staff that are using the services, and really understand the requirements, do a lot of listening and gathering around what is necessary and what is needed. Because I think a little too often we have very bright technologists, and I've been guilty of this as well, thinking we have a great idea and jumping a little farther ahead with an idea before really understanding all of the unanticipated consequences or ramifications of what those technologies might be. So really on the requirements, spending extra time gathering requirements, understanding the use cases, understanding the user journeys, doing goods. John Warner and others will talk about the jobs to be done, and I'm a big fan of that methodology. Really understand why you're doing it, not just the what and the how, as I talked about before, but why we're doing what we're doing, and ask why a couple of times. Sort of unpack what you're trying to accomplish and challenge it once, twice, three times and say, why are we doing this? Let's see, what are we really trying to get to here? And that helps you make better, more informed decisions around these technologies. So that by the time you do roll it out, by the time you do that, and there's a whole methodology around change management that's very important. Again, these things shouldn't just be an IT initiative ever again. They really should be a partnership between technology as sort of the ambassador or supporting service and whatever end department you're working with, HR, operations, any of these departments, and making sure that this is for them, by them, and with them. So that they're involved at the beginning, middle, and end, and it's not just something that IT is forcing on them, because there's still concerns and questions about adoption rates. And I will just be the first to say that would not be a problem if you involve the people you are actually trying to serve on in the process. So my guidance there would be just make sure that you're asking those questions early, you're keeping people involved early and throughout the process, and that will lead to the greatest success in technology adoption. And as people want to learn how to do the best way of, or sort of find the best way of rolling out these technologies, and I was part of a 4-hour session, I think, in front of the American Society on Aging's recent conference as well as CALA. I think it was the CALA conference. I talked about AI for about 4 hours with a panel of other folks in this industry. Just providing the guidance around asking these questions, making sure you consider the ramifications. We actually brought up some of an important subject in our industry, compliance, for example, that sometimes gets left till the end, when again, that should be asked early on because of some of the ramifications from a data standpoint and other things. But asking some of these questions early on and making sure you're doing sort of a well-informed discovery process is the best possible way to make sure you end up with success and adoption on the back end.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. And I want to dive deeper into the change
Yeah.
management bit.
Yes.
Because even if you get everything right, there comes a day when you need to roll out new technology
Yep.
within the organization, and
Yes.
different people within the organization naturally will have a different tolerance for imperfections in the product, which no product is perfect. So
It's
how do
inevitable.
you deal with rollout? How do you deal with adoption? How do you keep people on track and helping them keep their eye on the ball and understanding that their interests are aligned with the organization, even if what this technology is doing isn't something that they're directly being measured on?
I think part of that is just simply good project management rigor and making sure you're doing things in a structured, organized fashion so that predictable process comes predictable outcomes, usually, not always. But so part of it is just rigor and methodology in your approach. And part of it, as I said, is really the communication and how you're involving the right people early on and making sure you're understanding and asking the right questions. Because if you don't, you end up in the wrong place. So by involving those people early on, you're much more likely they will feel personally bought into the process and the outcomes, and they will feel personally invested in what has been decided and everything else. Even if it's a disagree and commit in some cases where there's disagreement, there sometimes will be. But making sure that you achieve that early on will mean that they are then invested in the success and the outcomes at the end of the project, and they're much more likely to be a net promoter of the product or the service or whatever you're trying to roll out. And again, it varies widely, of course, but the outcomes and the sort of flow of that tend to be fairly similar, regardless of what type of technology or what type of change, again, technical or non-technical. We could be simply talking about a process change that has nothing to do with technology. Change management really is based in and more successful because of communication. And as a technologist, I think I've learned that through painful mistakes over my career and sort of through the bumps and bruises you achieve by doing things the wrong way sometimes, until you figure out it goes so much better if you simply work with people rather than trying to work for them or against them eventually. So early in the process and then involved throughout is the best possible outcome.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about AI. So
Yes.
it's not new in AgeTech. I mean, loads of products have been using AI for years, but
Yes.
with generative AI, it's getting to a point where the technology is sometimes so good that it's scary. So
Yeah.
I wonder, what are the views of people that you've been talking to on a daily basis? How do they view this? Is it a piece of technology or a type of technology that they're excited about, scared of, want to adopt? Or just using AI is a deterrent? Because I just stumbled upon an article a few weeks ago that just using the words artificial intelligence in the product description can actually deter people.
I will say as a blanket, yes, to all of what you just said. Sorry to make you laugh while you're drinking, but it's yes, there's as with most things, especially with something that has achieved the hype cycle that AI has, you'll find people all the way along the spectrum. You'll find people who think it's the worst thing that could ever happen to the world and the world will end because of AI. And I'm not being hyperbolic there. You have people that are actively predicting the end of the world because of AI. And then you also have people that think it will save us and it will fix all of the problems in the world. And you have most of us who sit in between along that spectrum somewhere. I am cautiously optimistic, as usual. I'm an optimist about the potential of AI, especially where it's progressed to, given that certain things have changed. Again, having worked for an AI company 24 years ago, I have a little bit of perspective on this, just one perspective. But the fact that we can do things now that we couldn't have done back then, given factors like computing power and GPU power and other things that were simply not possible back then. So we are more capable of doing some truly incredible things with data. And I'm going to make a point there of talking about the right data at the right time a little later. That will potentially change how we work, how we live in really positive ways, as well as in some slightly scary ways too. So I'm very excited about what the potential is. Yes, there are people both in our industry and outside of our industry who are everything from scared to excited about this. I think we're starting to see some real use cases show up, not just in senior living, of course, because we tend to be near the end of the cycle where it comes to adoption for new technologies, a late adopter, as we would say politely. But there are real proven use cases, everything from resident safety technologies to revenue enhancing technologies to some basic operational enhancement, streamlining use of AI that are very practical, that are real, that are proven, grounded in data and proven in data, and that work well now. So it is real. It is something that is here. It's not coming, it's now. What is coming is sort of iterations on what is now and what is working. The challenge I will see, as I mentioned data a moment ago, most of us don't have our data organized, our data house organized, whether you call it a data lake, a data warehouse, or other things. That the necessary underpinning for a lot of this AI work are good sources and types and structures of data. And many of us do not have that well organized or well cleaned. So hygiene of data are very important to make. Otherwise, we've seen AI can hallucinate. It hallucinates even more potentially if you give it bad data, as you can imagine. So garbage in, garbage out. But there are real opportunities. This is the time we will see people spending time and investing in the data layers so that we can turn that around and use that as the source. So it's a foundational element that we have to build out, and we have to take time so that we have the clarity and structure and hygiene of our data and access to our data so that we can turn that around and really optimize the potential outcomes of AI. Did that answer your question?
It answers questions that I didn't even ask, which
Okay.
is great.
Sorry.
So if I were an entrepreneur and I really wanted to do something in the aging space, but I wasn't quite sure what is the problem that I'm going to dedicate 5-10 years of my life to solving, what would you recommend that I go after?
Before I recommend what you go after, I'd recommend you spend some time in the aging space or learning the aging space a little bit. So I was actually just commenting on something on LinkedIn today. United Church Homes, I think it is, Michael Hughes has set up a wonderful program of an entrepreneur in residence that lets folks actually spend a month in one of his communities to really immerse themselves in what it is to be a senior living operator. So before you start trying to answer questions or addressing pain points you think you know, it's really good to get the deep context, because as we see both in senior living but also in healthcare sort of writ large, the complexity and the outcomes really lie, the devil's in the details. So if you'll think you're solving for a really tough, thorny problem that will have a great TAM and you'll have a great exit potentially, and you figure out why nobody else has done this is because X, Y, and Z. So it's really important to immerse yourself. There are opportunities, I will say, both. Pretty much everything is using AI these days, but I will say everything from compliance. There's some interesting opportunities in compliance. There are interesting opportunities in staff experience and resident experience, especially with the interesting opportunities that AI and LLMs bring along in UI and UX, user interface and user experience, and bringing together disparate data sets for things like care coordination, which has been a focal point of mine for probably the last 10 years, trying to do better care coordination in various ways. I feel like we're going to enter into the golden era of care coordination here because of both some of the underpinnings on the government reimbursement side, but also on the technology side. I just recently gave a keynote speech, thanks to you for making that referral, on the inflection point I believe we're going through, because reimbursement's in place, the technology is mature enough, and senior living operators are finally adopting these technologies. And I think we're going to see some of this take off really around care coordination, around compliance, around sort of operational streamlining that other industries have done already. So there's some opportunities to do revenue cycle enhancement and other things there. So there are a number of different areas, but going back to where I started, to really make sure that they're solving for the right pain point, they got to spend time in the industry or really learn the industry without just trying to get a superficial start and then thinking you have the answers.
I couldn't agree more. And I love that Michael is doing an entrepreneur in residence program. I think that is so incredibly valuable for the entrepreneurs who are able to spend that time in senior living to really get an immersive experience, at least for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's a starting point.
That was actually, I think, my last question for today. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to add?
What do you think? Where you think we're going? You've asked me a lot of questions. I think I love seeing your annual market map. I'm curious to see if you're anticipating, and not to ask you to release anything that hasn't been released yet, but we've seen some new areas sort of open up that are new opportunities, as well as some combinations of different areas. Where do you think What is one new thing you think we'll see in 2025, if something to that degree?
Well, I can tell you what I hope we will see.
Please. Yeah.
I hope we will see more startups tackling dementia and Alzheimer's, because
Yes.
it is not only an incredibly painful problem to people with Alzheimer's and dementia and their families, but it's also an expensive problem. And we do have organizations funding and accelerating solutions
Yes.
for these types of startups. I hope we will see more startups tackling scams, because scammers are getting so creative
Yes.
that, I mean, we don't need one or two startups screening calls. We need 100 startups tackling 100 different types of scams. So those are the things that I hope we will see more of in 2025. And when I'll release the market map, we will see if my predictions have come true.
And I think you talk about caregiver supports too. I think that's the one other thing I'd call out is we've seen an improvement and an increase in caregiver targeted supports. We've seen the GUIDE program in the US emerge to support caregivers or folks with dementia. But I really would love to see more caregiver support and really people focus more, because of the myriad challenges, the stress, the exhaustion that leads to. So we really need to support our caregivers more in many different ways. So I'd love to see someone come up with some new ways of doing that.
Absolutely. And we definitely need to support caregivers, because we are all either are caregivers or will be caregivers.
Will be.
So
yeah.
we need to support ourselves. No one guarantees that you will get to grow old, but I can guarantee that you will become a caregiver.
Yes, one way or the other. Keren, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for joining the show. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you as always. And I wish you lots of success in your new role. Sequoia is lucky to have you.
And I'm grateful to be there. So thank you, Keren, again.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out the one about the Envisage initiative, which not only connects startups with potential clients, but it also provides funding to commercializing their solutions. I'll put the link either here or here. Until next time, stay humble, stay curious.